All right, piss and vinegar day 107 leg day. So today's topic is genetics and coping for your lack of genetics or perceived lack of genetics. A lot of times people think they have bad genetics when they don't. So for a very long time I thought, man, I have some pretty shit genetics. And in some retrospects I'm correct. I have a giant head, I have average clavicle width, and very wide hips rather. This is a terrible combination. Big head makes the rest of my muscles look smaller. I also have a lot of hair, which makes it even smaller, which is not a genetic component, but that's just, my shoulders aren't very wide, and my hips are very wide. So this gives me a shitty bone structure for bodybuilding. Now, it's not great, but again, I'm not trying to be a competitive bodybuilder, so this isn't a huge deal. And there's nothing I can do about it either. Just have to work around that. But then there's also parts of me that are decently genetically gifted, like my arms. They build up pretty quickly. They're not, great. They're not like incredibly gifted. And it's leg day, and the lighting's not so good. So, watch another video to have me prove that. But bear with me. My arms build decently quickly, and they're pretty decently strong. And so are my delts. But then my chest is absolutely garbage. My back is okay. My legs, pretty shit. My calves, non-existent. So for me, I'm probably on the lower end of the genetic spectrum. Some areas are above average, a lot of areas are below average. But this doesn't change my outlook on what I want to achieve. The thing is, at the end of the day, most people can build a comparable amount of muscle relative to their height and frame. If you have a guy who has the same frame and height as you, and he's just an average bloke and so are you, he might have the genetic capacity to build maybe a kilo or two more than you, but really most people can build the same amount of muscle throughout their natural hormone levels. And then around that is essentially just your hormones and your insertions. So insertions are probably the biggest one outside of the bone structure. Bone structure numero uno, but then it's the insertions. You can get a guy who's exactly my height, 6 foot tall, exactly my weight, 90 kilos, same body fat percentage, 18% or so, but look drastically better than me due to the fact that their muscles insert better. They cut light better. The bellies look better. That is extremely important. And again, there's not much you can do about that. But again, the same thing applies. He's the same size as me. He just looks more aesthetic. But we are the same size. So there's not much you can do about that. But generally, I genuinely believe that most people can get pretty big. They can get their circumferences, their measurements, their muscle density and size pretty fucking big, even with bad genetics. And I think bad genetics is seldom that you have, say, really high myostatin and really low testosterone, which are two things that you can actually fix quite a lot. You can't fix your bone structure, you can't fix your muscular insertions for the most part, but generally not at all. But you can fix a lot of these other components that are very well determined by genetics too. One guy is going to naturally have higher testosterone than another guy due to his genetics, but these things can be changed. And then genetics can be sneaky. You can have someone who has a very strong work ethic from their epigenetics, maybe their upbringing through their parents. They had great parents that made their work ethic better, which allowed them to train harder in the gym more consistently, which then allows them to beat the guy who has better genetics but is far less consistent. You might have a far better pain tolerance, so you can train with more intensity than another person. You might have better nutrient partitioning, so you can recover a little quicker, which means you can build muscle quicker because you're in the gym a little bit more frequently on a longer continuum. There are many, many factors, hundreds of different factors as far as genetics go that can directly or indirectly build muscle. Now, obviously, the best ones that have are bone structure and muscular insertions and then myostatin levels. But if you don't have those, there's a good chance that other areas of your genetics are actually in favor. In my case, I have a few that are in my favor. Some of my muscular insertions and muscle size areas are actually pretty good. And I would argue that for me, having big biceps and triceps and delts is probably one of the more favorable areas to have good genetics. Everyone wants big arms, everyone wants big shoulders. But then the trade-off was I have no pecs, which is a huge area that people want also. So you kind of have to just accept what you don't have, try to get it as big as possible, understand your limitations in muscular insertions and every other limitation that you have, but don't allow these limitations to limit you mentally from training or training hard or, just using these coping mechanisms to be like, oh, I'll never be big. No, you'll be big. You just won't be as aesthetic as the guy who has sick insertions. And then again, like there's so many other factors. You know, for example, ectomorphs, they have lean, slender physiques with fast metabolisms, which this will have them face challenges in building mass to their, you know, say mesomorphic or endomorphic counterparts, but their inherent traits that grant them the unique advantage in the realm of cutting and bulking cycles. Ectomorphs often find bulking phases that they are able to build lean muscle mass without accumulating a shit ton of fat, which then makes these cutting and bulking cycles much more efficient. They're much more consistent. They don't fuck up their bulks or cuts as much as an endomorph does, who in his own right has the ability to build a bunch of mass really quickly due to the fact that they have very fast metabolisms. They can get into a surplus much easier, so bulking is easier, but then cutting's really fucking hard. So there's a pro and con to a lot of different things. Some things don't have a con. You know, if your dad's Arnold Schwarzenegger and your mum's Arnold Schwarzenegger, then that's fucking sick. And I mean, like, you'll be huge and you won't have many downsides, but most of us don't have that. Most of us have pros and cons to our physique, and even Arnold had some of his own. So this is kind of tying into a previous video I made in when I said people are wanting what you don't have, where it's like, if you don't have something, don't be like, oh, well, I don't have the genetics for it, or I just can't have that thing. It's like, you can have it, you just won't have it necessarily as good as the guy who's genetically predispositioned to have said thing. But then paradoxically, the guy who's blessed with exceptional genetics, predisposed to all the muscle building in the world, often have themselves lacking motivation or the inclination to work out, because it comes to them so easily they can't really appreciate it. So the guys with the less favorable genetic circumstances, and the guy with the inferior genetics, when they do build the muscle, they cherish it that much more, because it took so much effort and will for them to get there. It took a bunch of information for them to get there, because they couldn't rest on the laurels. They couldn't just be, you know, using like subpar programming to get a great physique. They had to optimize everything. They had to work their absolute fucking ass off for it. So when they do have it, and they start getting all the, you know, benefits, the social benefits of building muscle, like chicks enjoying their company, women thinking they're attractive, men respecting you more, having more confidence, etc. The things that the genetic elite already had going for him anyway, because he's already pretty muscular, has a great bone structure, he might be taller, whatever. You can appreciate that a hell of a lot more. So genetics, you have to take it with a grain of salt, especially that last point. Really understand that Chad, 6'4", Chad Thundercock, who builds fucking pecs like it's nothing, biceps bulging through the wazoo, he doesn't give a shit about that, because he already had it. It's like, that took him like 6 months to get. He did a few bicep curls, a few bench presses, and all of a sudden Brock Lesnar is jacked out of his fucking mind. But Brock Lesnar doesn't give a shit about how fucking muscular it is, because it took nothing for him to get that. Or maybe he does, but nowhere as much as, you know, the Indian dude who's 5'4", who can't even, a woman won't even look at them. All of a sudden, you get this Hamza type of guy or whatever, they start lifting weights, they start taking care of themselves, they get leaner, they get more muscular, and all of a sudden their life turns around. That guy is going to value that size a lot more, and likely become bigger than the genetically gifted guy, due to the fact that he keeps doing it for, say, 10 years. So take genetics, again, with a grain of salt, and understand that you will be able to get big. You just may not have the same aesthetic proportions as the other guy. But you can only do what you can do personally, and don't let genetics be, you know, a coping mechanism. A lot of times, if you're not building a lot of muscle, it's because you're not training with intensity enough. So switch to high intensity.